Alone on a desert highway, the headlights wouldn't stop following her. Closer, flashing. A voice whispered in her head, "Don't pull over." She didn't. But something kept chasing. And years later, she saw that same twisted smile on the news. The bodies they found were never the only ones. Back in the 1980s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, during a time when she frequently made long drives between her parents' home and his, traveling back and forth to visit. It was a transitional phase in their lives. He had just graduated, and she hadn't yet moved in with him. The trip spanned several states and cut through stretches of desert that seemed to go on forever. It was the kind of drive that took hours, with long, empty highways winding through barren land. Some sections of the road stretched for hundreds of miles, desolate and isolated, the kind of place where you could go hours without seeing another driver, let alone a gas station. One day, Aunt Kay set out on one of these drives. A few hours in, she noticed a dark vehicle trailing behind her, slowly closing the distance. At first, she didn't pay much attention. She was singing along with the radio, relaxed and lost in her own world. But the car behind her started getting uncomfortably close. She reached over and turned off the music, glancing into her rearview mirror. That's when she saw it. The vehicle flashing its high beams, and a hand reaching out from the driver's side window, pointing at her car, motioning for her to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling. But a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through NK's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, she silently asked herself what the hell that was as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, and motioning to her to pull over, fear and confusion set in as she began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones. But she pressed on, just as her resolve wavered, and she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowing back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level with my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach, and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary and greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple of teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thought she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down. He slowed down. She speed up. He speed up. Got to the point that he began to try and push her off the road. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close, or even get in between those trucks, she would be safe. So she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicles slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple of hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years. My aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, and unsolved mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row as she paired another match of socks. She heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family, and he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by, and he'd wait. But every so often, a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone. So he'd pull out behind them and follow them. He said he'd flash his brights, honk in motion for them to pull over. My aunt, now paralyzed, continued to listen. They would eventually pull over. They always did. Then I'd reach in and pull a few wires loose. When the car wouldn't start, I'd act real casual. Told them it was no big deal. My buddy runs a shop just a town over. I'd offer them a ride. Said it'd be quick, cheap. As he spoke, my aunt slowly walked into the living room, laundry still in her hands, eyes fixed on the TV. They always got in. He paused. Then I'd do what I do. Assault them, kill them, bury them somewhere out there in the desert. The interviewer asked, "How many?" The man smirked. "They'll never find all the bodies. I lost count." "And how many got away?" He shrugged. "Maybe 2, 3. My aunt froze in place, breath shallow, eyes wide. On the screen, he smiled. That same crooked, toothless grin she'd seen once before. On that highway, all those years ago. It was Henry Lee Lucas. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, it was a scorching summer afternoon. I had gone out for a hike and ended up completely lost. Though that's a whole different story on its own. Let's just say I'd wandered for miles through untouched wilderness, no trails in sight. By the time I finally stumbled onto a road, I had no idea how far I'd come or which direction led back to my car. I was dead on my feet, drained, overheated, and still several grueling miles away from where I'd parked. Eventually, after hours of stumbling through the mountains and forest, I began the long journey home. The sun was still high, beating down hard as I trudged along the quiet country road. Home was still about 15 miles away, and I live way out in the sticks, nothing but open land and silence between me and my front door. That's when I saw him, a heavy-set man, clearly out of shape, standing by the roadside with his thumb out. He was hitchhiking in the same direction I was headed, and just by looking at him, I could tell he had one hell of a walk ahead of him. The same kind of punishing trek I had just finished, barely 20 minutes earlier. Of course, I felt sorry for the fellow having a similar ordeal as I just had, and so I stopped in motion for him to get in. I did not realize my ordeals for the day were not over yet. As he opened the door, he gave me a look, and we exchanged a greeting as he squeezed into the front seat. He was going to a spot off of the highway, on the way to my house, and off we went, engaging in light conversation. I glanced down at his side, and I noticed he had a prosthetic arm made of a hard, heavy ballistic plastic. With a metal hook for grasping instead of a hand from the conversation, he was an out-of-work construction heavy equipment operator whose house was undergoing a bank foreclosure. He was basically squatting illegally on his own property, probably hitching around during the day to avoid the sheriff evicting him and coming back in the evening to let himself into the basement. So, basically, a homeless vagrant and a transient that still had a physical address. This didn't raise any red flags with me at the time, though maybe it should have. I have a repertoire of interesting stories I like to tell. I dusted one off and sold him a yard or two to pass the miles and be friendly, as it makes the ride easier. He listened politely, and I found he liked to talk a little bit himself. My tales must have encouraged him because he began to tell me a very strange tale of his own. He began to relate to me that years ago, during what he claimed as one of the worst blizzards of the century. In his words, a woman had a bad accident on the U.S. route that went past his house. He said that she was badly injured from the accident and bleeding to death. His story continued, and he mentioned that the weather was so bad that the road was undrivable, but as a construction operator, he had a backhoe. He said that he loaded the injured woman into the bucket of the backhoe and drove her 30 miles through the freezing cold and blizzard to a major medical center and delivered her to the that was a pretty odd tale, I thought. I am pretty saint smart, having seen a lot of the world and some of the more dangerous places in it. I believe that he had changed up the story somewhat to protect the guilty. He wanted to share his story, but disguised his role, or what had really happened. In other words, I believe his story contained a kernel of truth, but he had changed a few details. I am pretty quick to spot inconsistencies and also can analyze just as quickly. It comes with the street smarts, I guess, another word for the survival instinct. What I think is true is that a woman who was fatally injured, perhaps someone who had come to his door for help. I thought that she died, and I think he used the bucket loader to bury the body. The wine, wherefore, I could not guess at, but I had immediately gotten that impression. I didn't have much time to think about it, as the drive was coming to an end. It may seem weird to you that I came to that conclusion, but perhaps what follows will convince you. As he ended his story, we had come to the turn for his house. As I turned into the long driveway, he had just ended his story, and I began to make improper propositions to me as to what he would like to have happen. I was a bit taken aback, but just simply told him politely that it was not my thing and ended my conversation as we pulled up to his house, and he continued to insist. The problem was that he was not taking no for an answer. I realized that things were rapidly getting out of hands, but I am a cool customer when dealing with actual stress and danger. I like to think that I'm pretty hardcore, which discourages most potential malefactors, but not this guy, which shows just how dangerous he was. He wasn't getting out of the car now that we were stopped, and he had his hard plastic arm, solid and heavy as a log, raised halfway between us, looking me straight in the eye and not saying anything. Having studied self-defense, I knew the deal. If I looked away or blinked, he would knock me out with the arm. He was formidable as well. He may have been fat, but he was a construction worker with large arms and muscles, from a life of heavy work. The weight was all to his advantage in any struggle. I knew the deal, though, and I always had a plan in case a hitchhiker proved to be dangerous. I had my seatbelt on, and he didn't. The plan was to floor the car into his house at about 60 and put him through the windshield. Even if I was injured or unconscious myself, hopefully he would be worse. The idea was that the noise of a high-speed crash would bring neighbors to find out what happened. That would also blur the horn. But I could see that if he went through the trouble of knocking me out for the purpose of assaulting me, that likely I would never wake up again. Someone this dangerous was not going to leave a witness that could put him in jail for the rest of his life. Likely he was a career criminal, and this was not his first rodeo. The other secret learned from martial arts is to never look away and hold the gaze, breathe the intent, then spontaneously block or deflect the initial attack. This guy could see from my eyes that he would have a real fight on his hands, that I was fully ready for a life or death combat. The situation ended when he opened the door and anticlimactically got out. I quickly backed out of the yard, spun the car around, giving him a departing glance, and headed out. Whew, I thought. That is the most dangerous motherfucker that I have ever encountered. I really should call the state police and tell them to keep an eye out on this scary bitch, because it'll only be a matter of time before he tries to kill somebody, and at least it'll have a warning about him on their files. But I thought the police often don't seem to take me seriously, and he didn't do anything other than pose a threat. No actual assault. So what can I do? The real reason was, now that the situation was over, I just wanted to forget about it. It had been a very long day after all. A police report would take up another hour of my dinner time, and I would have to deal with possibly skeptical or unhelpful authorities. In 2020 retrospect, I see now that was a mistake. About 10 years later, the property was the site of a very active crime scene. A woman from a nearby state had come to live at that house and had gone missing. I did not realize that his house was the site until I drove. One day, I drove past the property again, and the scene hit me like a punch. A state police crime scene bus was parked out front, flanked by at least 5 cruisers and a helicopter circling overhead. The entire area was sealed off with crime scene tape. That's when it sank in. I should have said something sooner. I remember thinking, God, if only I had reported what I saw. Maybe this could have been stopped, but I hadn't. That day, I'd been lazy, more wrapped up in my own life than doing the right thing. Later, news broke. They found the girl's body in a nearby pond and in a freezer that had once sat in that house. Dark, twisted stories began to circulate. Stories about a couple who'd taken in a young homeless girl, down on her luck, only to exploit her. And from the sound of it, there were others involved. It turned into a disturbing tale, one I won't go into out of respect for her family. A few days after that, I drove by again. The full-scale investigation was winding down. Only 1 or 2 patrol cars remained, keeping watch over the scene. That's when I finally made the call to the state police. I told them what Captain Hook had mentioned to me about the backhoe. The very next day, the place was crawling with investigators again. I'm convinced they were searching for more remains. The couple was never charged for her death, but last I heard, they were still behind bars, locked away for other crimes. And if there's one thing I walked away with, it's this: if you see something, say something. A 25-year-old woman had an experience about 4 days ago that I just can't shake. She was dog-sitting for her boyfriend while he was off on a backpacking trip. His house is tucked away in a semi-remote spot, down at the bottom of a hill, on a few acres of land. It's right beside the highway, and across from it sits a small rural neighborhood. It's the kind of place that feels both sketchy and strangely safe. What I mean is, the community's tight-knit, yet people mostly keep to themselves. You'll find crumbling, abandoned houses right next to neat, well-maintained homes. Classic countryside vibes. So when I agreed to look after his property and his dog, I didn't feel unsafe. The dog, Hennessy, is a 115-pound jet black American bulldog and English lab mix. A solid wall of muscle. Since my boyfriend and I started dating, Hennessy's grown incredibly protective of both me and my own dog, Lottie, a 57-pound poodle mix with more attitude than size. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own. And so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because that was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting, and it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off, as I tend to be fairly paranoid, due to my years of reading "Let's Not Me" stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did, but that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps in the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that was the end of it. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too, and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on the door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he rehearsed the line, or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No!" and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second, and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lady. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's gnashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into my door. I saw the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking, and he ferociously chomps toward the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell him what happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't anything I could really do. But they did take my statement, and they told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After everything, I curled up with him and Lottie that night and just cried, realizing how terrifying the whole ordeal had been. The very next day, I drove nearly an hour to the pet store to get him the biggest bone I could find. He definitely earned it. I picked something out for Lottie, too. I still don't understand why that creep never went after him, especially with 2 dogs barking inside. My guess is he didn't realize there were 2 dogs. Or maybe he thought both were like my little fluffy poodle, something he wouldn't fear. I'm grateful the guy wasn't armed. Looking back, I probably should have called the cops and stayed locked inside. But maybe it was because he saw Hennessy. Now I know one thing for sure. If he ever comes back and tries to mess with us again, my big, gentle guy won't hesitate to defend his family. He'd rip that creep's arm off without a second thought. This took place several years ago. While it might not be as terrifying as some of the stories you've heard, it remains one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I'm 33 years old and live out in the rural Midwest. I was born and raised in my hometown, and aside from a few months spent living with my dad on the East Coast, I've stayed here my whole life. Over time, I've become pretty familiar with most of the back roads in the area. One of those roads is an old highway that's lost much of its traffic since the interstate was built through town. It's a long, winding stretch that offers beautiful scenic views during the day and a quiet retreat from the city lights after dark. Along this road, there's a small parking area with no more than 10 spots, 2 picnic tables, and a single trash bin. Because it's tucked away in dense woods and secluded from the rest of the drive, it's easy to overlook. Over the years, this hidden spot became a common hangout for local teens looking to get away. I spent many Friday nights there, smoking with friends and making memories. It's a place filled with nostalgia, and whenever I need some peace or solitude, it's still one of my favorite places to escape to. One night, about 5 years ago, my girlfriend and I are going through a rough patch. We had a big fight due to having to work early in the morning, and her deciding to have a party full of her loud and intoxicated friends. and things escalated, and I stormed out of the house and started driving towards my favorite spot. As soon as I was out of the city limits, I promptly cranked my angriest metal music and sped down the road, chain smoking my menthols in an effort to calm down until I finally found the turnoff for the spot. I was happy to find no other cars in the lot, meaning that I wouldn't awkwardly stumble upon two lovers engaged in, the act. And I immediately jumped out of the car and sat down on one of the picnic tables, lit a cigarette, and stared at the stars. I sat there for several minutes until I decided to head back to the warmth of my car after hearing some rustling coming from the woods. Not wanting to become a chew toy for a coyote or an angry bobcat, I hustled back to my car and blared my music again, quickly forgetting the sounds that I had just heard. I decided to have one more smoke and then make my way home. I smoked it halfway through when out of nowhere, I heard pounding coming from the passenger side of my car. I looked over to see a large hand beating against the window. I turned on my music that was still blasting, and as I did, I can hear a very angry voice shouting, "Open door," while yanking on the door handle. Thankfully, my doors were locked, and after a few moments, the man disappeared from the passenger side, and then reappeared out of the driver's side window, while screaming and cursing at me to open the door. He was now punching my window, trying to get in. I was frozen in a mix of confusion and fear, but eventually snapped out of it and threw the car in reverse. It was so dark that I didn't get a good look at the guy, except for a split second he was illuminated by my headlights. He had a black zip-up hoodie with the hood up, a dark gray t-shirt, and a ball cap. He was a stocky guy and had to be well over 6 feet as he towered over my Sonata. The only distinguishing feature that I could make out was a very large, dark beard, and I noped out of there real quick. I flirted across the parking lot and back towards the highway, and that's when I heard it. A loud bang that sounded like a gun. I slammed my foot down on the gas and took the first turn I could find. Once I was certain no one was following me, I eased up, only to realize I was doing 90 miles per hour on a gravel road. At the time, one of my closest friends worked at a nearby gas station, so I headed there to tell him everything. We carefully inspected my car and noticed a few dents on the roof, plus what looked like a boot print on the passenger door. After talking it through, we decided against calling the police. The spot was about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, and we figured the guy would be long gone by the time anyone arrived. Looking back, I know that was probably foolish. I'm still shaken by the whole experience. I don't know if the guy meant to rob me, steal my car, or something worse, but I'm just thankful I made it home safe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.